Aloha, this is Jill, the Barefoot Grandma, talking to you from the island of Kauai. Today is the first in a series of videos that will outline my journey with breast cancer. And if you're watching right now, it may be that you yourself have cancer, breast or otherwise, that you're newly diagnosed or somewhere along your treatment line. Maybe you've had cancer in the past. Maybe you have a family member with cancer, or maybe a friend, or maybe you're just curious about the topic. I'm hoping that this video will give something to you. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I am not recommending anything that I did for anybody else. It is my own personal journey. And while it is a little unique in some areas, I also know that I share a lot of similarities in my story. So I'm hoping that at the end of the video you'll tell me a little bit about you and maybe why you watched today's video. I'm happy to answer any questions about any part of what you hear today. But really, I'm just hoping to maybe make somebody's life a little easier, a little less scary, maybe even make you laugh sometimes, because that was an important part of my healing and journey. But let's jump into it. Today, I'm going to focus on the very beginning, and that was the diagnosis. But I need to start with, before I was even diagnosed, the symptoms that I had. So 1999 was the year, and that year my youngest son was graduating high school. And this stands out clearly in my mind because my left breast had blown up to the size of a watermelon. And I'm not kidding when I say that. It was large, it was red, and it was painful. And the reason why his graduation sticks out so well in my mind is because in attending his graduation, obviously you're in a crowd of people, and I had to walk through the crowd with my hand out like this because my breast was so painful and so sore that I could not tolerate anybody bumping into it. So I had to protect my breast that whole evening. I think it was after that, actually, that I went to my general practitioner to find out what was going on. Because literally this came pretty much overnight. And I do remember initially that my primary care physician decided that it was an infection, which in the beginning that kind of made sense, though I did tell him that I had had some discharge from not just that nipple, but both nipples, a black discharge. And honestly, I'm pretty sure I knew then, and certainly afterwards, that wasn't good, but you go into your doctor's office kind of trusting the process. So he started me on a regime of antibiotics, which obviously in retrospect that didn't do shit. And was back fairly short order, maybe even before the end of the antibiotics. And he gave me another regime of a different antibiotic. Once again, same result, and ended up back in his office. And at that point, he kind of threw his hands up in the air and said, "I think it's time for you to go see a surgeon." Now, I'm not disrespecting my primary care at the time. I really liked him. He was a good family doctor, sports medicine doctor, and maybe it just wasn't, who knows? I'm not going to try to guess. But so I literally left his office and went to the office of a general surgeon who, believe it or not, I can't remember the name of. And I went into the exam, removed my blouse and my bra, and he didn't even have to touch or do an exam. He took one look at my breast and said, "That's malignant. I'm 99.9% sure." So I do remember laying there even though I knew what the word malignant meant, I had to ask for clarification because it's not quite what I was anticipating hearing. I literally left that office and went for a mammogram. And let me tell you, if mammograms on the best of days, regardless of whether you're small-breasted or large-breasted, is not pleasant. But when your breast has blown up to the size of a watermelon and it's already painful as hell, having a mammogram is pretty much enough to want to kill the person that's doing that to you. Incredibly painful. But the mammogram didn't show a thing. And that's not particularly surprising because my diagnosis ended up being inflammatory breast cancer, which specifically invasive lobular breast cancer. And I was staged at 3B. And I also ended up being triple negative. And for those of you that may not know what triple negative means, it means that my particular kind of cancer was estrogen, progesterone, and HER2 negative. All of that being said, between the inflammatory type and being triple negative, really made my cancer one of the most aggressive and difficult to treat cancers. As I had mentioned in my Get to Know You video that I did a few minutes ago, later in my treatment with my oncologist, whom I'm going to plug later and say how much I love, I did read a note of his that said, I can't remember exactly, but essentially 30% chance of survival. Now, it might have said 30%. That was the best I was going to get. I don't remember, but the type of cancer that I had certainly warranted that note to himself. So at that point, within, I want to say, 5 days, I went from my general practitioner to a surgeon who, actually, I want to put this on pause, one of 2 doctors in that entire journey that I fired. And I'm going to come back to your healthcare team in a later video, but just because you've been assigned a doctor does not mean you need to keep that doctor if you don't have confidence in that doctor. That doctor doesn't treat you well. In this particular case, he just was very patronizing, and I did not get a good feel for him at all. So beyond the initial diagnosis that he facilitated, I cut him loose immediately, and I'll come back to that later. But and then on to an oncologist, and okay, I'm going to plug my oncologist in Sonoma County. His name was Dr. Peter Brett. He's now with Sutter Health, I believe, and a phenomenal doctor, good man, quiet, kind of a shy sense of humor. He tolerated me and my not so shy sense of humor very well, and to the point that I was teasing him that I should get a family discount because my mom had been diagnosed with colon cancer the year before that I was diagnosed, and my mom, I get my personality from my mom, so she was a little bit of a pain in the butt too. God bless her, rest her soul. So there was a lot going on in that first week, a lot of information, and just really, you know, at the time, my 2 oldest kids, one was out of the house. My oldest daughter was at Cal Poly. My youngest son was going off to live in the same area, Cuesta, and go to Cuesta Junior College. And then I had my youngest daughter at home at the time. So I had 4 kids and a husband, and for anybody, it doesn't matter whether you're married, you have a family, or you're single man or woman with a diagnosis of breast cancer. And yes, by now you should know that men do get breast cancer. It's a terrifying moment, a terrifying diagnosis, and you have more questions than you have answers. And fortunately, or unfortunately, I'm a very curious person by nature, and I love research, and that helped me a lot. It doesn't work for other people, and I actually wouldn't even recommend it for everybody, but I'm pretty good at taking things with a grain of salt and sifting through things and researching, so that was really helpful. But my beloved oncologist suggested his recommendation for treatment, which I'll do a separate video on the treatment protocol and what that felt like and how it was administered and the side effects of that. But I started that next week. So 3 doctors and then starting treatment within a week to 10 days was a lot to do and take in. And it was a scary time. But it all actually went so fast. In some ways it was a little bit merciful because it kept me on my toes and kept me doing things. I did opt to go to the UCLA Second Opinion program to just see, not that I was distrustful of Dr. Brett's suggestions, but just to get an overview of this cancer and see if he or any of my other healthcare providers were on task and I guess rather on point. And so I went, and they recommend that you take somebody with you, which my husband did, and they recommend, at least they did at the time, that you take a tape recorder, kind of old school. Now we have our iPhones and notes and galaxies and whatnot, but which we did. So we taped all the interviews, and I kept those for a long time, and I don't know whatever happened to them. Long story short, it was a full day. We flew down to LA. We saw every kind of doctor under the sun, psychologist, reconstructive surgeon, medical oncologist, radiation oncologist, nutritionist. I might even be forgetting somebody in there. But the good news, long story short, they agreed with everything that was being prescribed for me, and so I had some confidence going forward. I would say that, well, I guess the other thing that I should tell you a little bit about in that process is the tests that I was asked to do to come to this diagnosis. I had a PET scan, PET, and that's where they shoot radioactive dye into your body and see where the radioactive dye goes to. It kind of attaches itself to the cancerous site, and as anticipated, I had an uptake pretty significantly in my left breast. But the twist on that was I also had an uptake in my right breast, and the explanation at that time was that it's just sometimes naturally happens because you have all this dye in your system and it needs to go somewhere, and that's kind of where it goes. I'm not sure I entirely bought that, and I did file it away for another day. I had, as I'd mentioned, a mammogram, which was horrible, and then I also had a CT. And that I found out that I'm allergic to the contrast iodine. So as they're doing the test, I'm losing the ability to breathe and started to panic, which didn't help matters, obviously. But I was really starting to struggle, and I must have been flailing around because the attending doctor obviously pulled me out of the CT scanner and gave me a shot of, I'm assuming something, if not Benadryl, something similar, which counteracted my allergic reaction to the allergy to the iodine, which now I have to make sure that I'm aware of. And actually, side note, just had a CT with contrast iodine because I had foregone them all these years when I've needed to have other CTs. But in this particular situation recently, I had to have the iodine, or they were strongly recommending it. And so I got loaded up with a bunch of drugs and Benadryl and I think some other things. And the good news is I managed to have the CT with the contrast without a problem, but it is something that I need to be aware of and probably should wear a medical alert bracelet or something that lets people know that I have that in case I'm in a car accident. Anyway, side note. So those are some of the tests that I had, and I guess it's also important to know, because some of you might be asking, why did you not have surgery first? And the answer to that question is because I had an inflammatory style of breast cancer. There wasn't really anything to remove per se, so I couldn't go in and have a tumor removed. There was no tumor. It was inflammatory, and inflammatory looks like, they call it orange peel skin. So my breast, as I had mentioned, was very large, very red, and it had that bumpy skin to it, particularly on the left outer quadrant of my breast. So because it was an aggressive cancer and potentially had a poor prognosis, they wanted to do chemo immediately. So my regime was going to be chemo, followed by a full mastectomy, and then more chemo, and then radiation. And so at a couple points in this journey, I had to make some pretty interesting decisions, which I'm going to save those cliffhangers for later. But I'm going to close today's video with just letting you know that if you're at the beginning of your own diagnosis, it is a scary time, and I want to give you permission and encourage you, not just give you permission, not that I have the ability to do that, but to encourage you to create some boundaries for yourself and your family, whatever that might be. You don't owe anybody anything, and as a matter of fact, now is the time to really make your life about you, more so than your children, more so than your husband, and obviously they're a part of your decision-making reasoning, but you're going to have to be your best advocate. You're going to be the one that takes care of you, and you're going to have these other hopefully wonderful people in your life to support you, but you have to take care of you, and that means creating space for yourself, being kind to yourself, being patient with yourself, giving yourself permission to be angry, to be resentful, to laugh, to have a good time still, to cry uncontrollably. And I also encourage you to talk to your husband or your partner, or maybe it's just a friend or a roommate, and let them know what you need. And I also encourage you to make it okay for them to tell you what they might need. And at some point in another video, I want to talk about the role of your significant other, partner, spouse, and they have their, and I actually may even interview my husband, because he has a very different perspective of that journey, and he had his own journey through that, as well as my children. So more videos to come. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I want to tell you today. There'll be lots of times to talk. So please leave me your thoughts. Tell me your stories if you'd like. Give me your feedback on this video, what I could have done better, what you want to hear more of. I have a lot of topics that I want to cover. Please like the video if you do. Please follow me. I'm hoping to really make this a big part of my life, so your support in that area would be great. At some point I'm going to share some of my photography with you, and maybe down the road when I figure out this whole YouTube thing, I may make some t-shirts available with some of my photography images on them. but that's way down the road because I'm just trying to get my first videos done. I'm so excited to talk to you. I'm excited to meet you and become a part of your life. And I really, really do hope that by my sharing my journey with you, that you realize that you can make it, and hope is important, and statistics don't mean a goddamn thing. They really don't. Because you'll either be on one side or the other, and you're not going to know until you've gone through your journey. So just ignore the statistics. Do you? Because you're wonderful. Aloha.